in a forgotten corner of ancient lands where the sun burned the hills gold and the winds whispered through olive trees, there lived a man unlike any other. His name was Job. Not a warrior, not a king. Yet his name echoed louder through the ages than armies ever could. Job was known far and wide not for his sword, nor his crown, but for something rarer, something more divine, righteousness without reward. He was a man who walked upright in a world that bent toward corruption. His hands were just, his tongue restrained, his prayers unceasing. He was beloved by the poor, honored by the elders, and feared, yes, feared by those whose hearts were weighed down by pride. He had everything a man could desire: land that drank the rain, flocks too many to count, servants at his command, children full of laughter, and a name untainted by deceit or violence. Yet behind his wealth and wisdom, there beat a heart wholly surrendered to the Creator. Job did not worship God because he was wealthy. He was wealthy because he never ceased worshipping. But what is a man's piety if it is never tested? What is faith if it stands only in sunlight far above the earth, in the realm of the unseen? A conversation unfolded, one that would tilt the world beneath Job's feet. A whisper rose before the throne of the Almighty: does Job fear God for nothing? It was not Job's enemies who doubted him. It was not his servants or neighbors. It was a voice ancient and dark, one who had roamed the earth and watched men fall for far less. A challenge was cast before the heavens: strip Job of his fortune, break his body, turn his joy into dust, and he will curse the very name he once praised. The Almighty, who knows the hearts of men better than they know themselves, accepted the challenge not to learn something new, but to reveal something hidden, the indestructible nature of true faith. And so the skies closed, and the storm began. What followed was not a simple fall from grace. It was a slow, relentless unraveling. First the herds vanished. Then his servants. Then his children. Then his flesh. His skin erupted in sores. His bones ached with pain. His breath became foul. His friends grew silent. His name turned from honor to pity. Even his wife, his closest comfort, began to break. And still, he did not curse. He did not curse. This is not merely the story of a man who suffered. It is the story of a man who was stripped of every earthly good and still clung to the one thing that could not be taken: his trust in God. Job became a mirror for every soul who has ever asked, "Why me?" He became a symbol for every righteous sufferer, every faithful heart breaking in silence, every unseen worshipper holding on when there is no reason left except God. This is his story. The story of the man who whispered praise through pain. The man who stood while the world expected him to fall. The prophet Job. Birth and early life. Before the trials, before the pain, before the silence that would echo through history, there was a beginning, a birth into dignity, into grace, into a lineage marked by light. Job, whose Hebrew name is Ayoub, was born in the highlands of the east, a land of rolling plains, fertile valleys, and open skies. Ancient traditions differ on the exact location. Some say Uz, others believe it was Edessa or near the borderlands of Syria and Arabia. Wherever it was, it bore witness to the entrance of a soul chosen not for power or conquest, but for purity of heart. Job was not born to idols. He descended from the sacred lineage of Esau, the son of Isaac, and the grandson of Abraham, the friend of God. Though generations separated him from the patriarchs, the blood of the covenant still ran through his veins. He was born into a house of worship, not war, a home that honored truth, not idols. From his youth, Job was unlike the children around him. Where others chased praise, he pursued wisdom. While other boys scrambled for coin and land, Job pondered the stars and their maker. He listened more than he spoke. He gave more than he received. He would often be found tending the sick animals before the healthy, offering food to strangers before himself, bowing in prayer under trees while the world passed him by. His father, a man of considerable wealth and virtue, raised him to understand not just the scriptures of his forefathers, but the weight of moral responsibility. "We are not owners," his father would say, "we are stewards. And the Lord gives, not for our pride, but for our proving." Even as a young man, Job was loved by the poor, for he treated them as brothers. His hands were generous, but never boastful. His words were soft, but never weak. In the eyes of the elders, he was counted as wise beyond his years. In the eyes of heaven, he was a soul prepared for a path few would ever walk. By the time he reached manhood, Job had inherited not only his father's wealth, but his people's admiration. His fields were vast, his herds without number, and his household full of harmony. He married a noble woman, faithful and kind, and was blessed with many children, each one raised in the fear of God, each one a joy to his heart. But Job's greatness was not measured by his wealth. What set him apart, what made him known even among the heavenly hosts, was his unshakable character. Even in youth, he turned away from gossip. He rejected injustice, even when it served him. He refused dishonest gain, even when no one would see. He would rise before dawn to pray, not out of habit, but out of hunger for nearness to the Creator. His soul, even then, burned with something divine. The world around him admired his fortune, but the heavens admired his faith. And so, before the darkness came, before the storms were allowed to gather, Job's early life stood as a tower of righteousness. A tower not built by hands, but by choices, quiet, humble, holy. The man who would endure the world's greatest test was not forged in fire. He was born in light. World at that time. The world into which Job was born shimmered with outward prosperity, but behind the golden veils lay a creeping rot. It was a time of peace, but not purity, a time when cities were rising, but consciences were falling. The lands of the east were flush with trade, their markets full, their caravans long, their festivals loud. Wealth flowed like wine, and voices praised men louder than they praised God. It was a world that had tasted the truth, yet forgotten its flavor. The sacred lineage of Abraham had spread far and wide. The stories of the one true God still lingered among the tribes. The names of Noah, Shem, Eber, and Abraham were spoken in reverence by elders. Yet that reverence had faded into ritual. The heart of worship had withered beneath the weight of gold, grain, and pride. Idols began to appear again, not always as carved stone, but as silent gods of wealth, lust, and status. The people honored their ancestors, but not their God. The descendants of Esau and other clans of the Arabian and Mesopotamian regions prospered in numbers and goods. Cities rose along the Euphrates and Oront, stretching across the edges of what we now call Syria, Jordan, and northern Arabia. Fertile valleys yielded abundance. The shepherd's flocks grew fat. Merchants counted coin until their hands trembled. But amid this ease, the poor were neglected, the orphan unheard, and the stranger pushed aside. It was an era without war, but not without wickedness. False prophets roamed the desert, preaching the power of forgotten deities. Superstition gripped the minds of nobles and peasants alike. Offerings were made to stars and spirits. Even those who remembered the Most High often reduced him to just one god among many, a distant, silent presence in a world run by appetite. The just were rare. The upright were mocked. The faithful were few. In such an age, Job's righteousness was more than virtue, it was rebellion. To fear God in a time of vanity was an act of spiritual resistance. To give generously when others hoarded, to bow in the dust while others toasted to idols, to fast when others feasted in arrogance, this made Job not just a good man, but a shining anomaly. His very existence was a judgment against his age. And heaven watched. Even the unseen world was stirred. The sons of God, as the ancient scriptures declare, gathered in the celestial courts. Among them was one who did not bow, a whispering shadow, a questioner of motives. He had wandered the earth and seen mankind fall with little effort. Pride, lust, greed, his weapons were old but effective. And then he saw Job, the only one who stood tall in a world that had bowed. And so a divine contest was conceived, one that would expose the sickness of the world and the strength of a soul. The world around Job was not ready for what would unfold. It would soon learn that trials do not only come upon the wicked and that suffering is not always a curse. The heavens had weighed the world and found it wanting. But one man still stood. One man would be tested not for the sins of others, but for the glory of truth. That man was Job. Signs of prophethood. Long before the wind tore through his house, long before the skin on his bones cracked under the weight of suffering, the signs had already begun to whisper. Job was no ordinary man. He was born with a calm that unsettled men of power and soothed men of sorrow. His gaze was deep, as if he saw the edges of things past coin, past skin, into the soul. In the silence between his words was something holy, a quiet authority not learned in scrolls or taught by elders. There was a weight to his presence, though he never raised his voice. He walked through his land like a king with no throne and no crown, yet no one questioned his greatness. And there were signs subtle to the careless, but clear to those whose hearts still listened for the divine. The rain would wait for his prayer. When drought threatened the fields, Job would raise his hands, and the skies would open not with violence, but with mercy. Farmers began to time their hopes with his supplications. When Job prayed, the people exhaled. The sick came to him not for herbs, but for healing. He would lay his hand on the fevered brow or speak words few could understand, and warmth would return to cold flesh. These were not loud miracles, they were quiet restorations. But they were not unnoticed. He spoke of things he had never studied, and yet scholars nodded when he answered. He could recall the generations of Noah, the names of the sons of Eber, the ancient warnings of the flood stories many had twisted or forgotten. When Job spoke of the Creator, it was not as a theologian, but as one who knew him intimately. Even the animals behaved differently in his presence. It was said that once, while walking through the hills, Job encountered a wild lion. The men with him fled in terror. But Job did not move. He looked upon the beast, and the lion bowed its head and passed. Creation, he later said, knows its maker. And it knows who walks with him. But the clearest sign of all was his heart unmoved by praise, unshaken by wealth. Though his house was vast, he lived simply. Though his granaries were full, he fasted. Though his name was celebrated, he lowered himself to the dust. He never turned away a beggar. He never raised his voice in pride. He would wash the feet of strangers. He would rise at night to pray while the city slept. And then there were the dreams. He saw visions not of conquest, but of judgment. In the still of the night, he would tremble. He would wake and pray for his children, fearing they had unknowingly sinned. Let me stand before God for them, he would say. Let my righteousness cover their missteps. The heavens watched him. The earth whispered of him, even the shadows knew his name. And in that quiet waiting, in that holy patience, in that sacred kindness toward all things living, it became clear, Job was chosen. not for greatness as men define it but for a test only the chosen can bear. And the signs had all foretold what the storm would confirm, he was a prophet of the Most High. Called to prophethood. It began not with fire from heaven nor voices thundering through the sky. It began with stillness. Job, known in the tongue of his people as Ayoub, had already lived most of his life in righteousness before the mantle of prophethood came upon him. He was not a young man yearning for greatness, nor a warrior seeking validation from the divine. He was a servant, content in humility, rich in gratitude, anchored in prayer. But the heavens saw deeper. The Most High does not anoint men at random. His prophets are not selected by lineage alone, nor by worldly skill, but by the fire burning in their soul. Job, though surrounded by abundance, never forgot the giver. Though praised by men, he only sought the approval of the one unseen. He was a man of devotion long before the call descended. It is written in ancient tradition that the call came in a dream yet more vivid than waking life. In that vision, the sky was open. The stars burned in silence. And the earth trembled not from chaos, but from majesty. From the heavens came a voice, not loud yet unshakable, like thunder wrapped in wind, like the sea whispering to the shore. O Job, servant of the Most High, rise. For you have been chosen. Not for your wealth. Not for your wisdom. But for your patience, which shall become your weapon. For your gratitude, which shall become your strength. And for your faith, which shall become a sign for generations to come. Job awoke in tears. Not of fear, but of awe. He fell prostrate to the earth before dawn broke, and he remained there long into the day. He did not seek crowds. He did not announce what he had seen. But from that day forward, the world around him began to change. Nature itself seemed to affirm his calling. The winds that moved through his fields took a different course, always gentle near his household. His orchards bore fruit before their season. The sick, when touched by his hand, found sudden relief. Flocks multiplied, and the wild beasts that once stalked the edge of his lands kept their distance, as if forbidden by unseen command. But Job did not use his calling to gather crowds. He did not build temples to his name. He continued to live as before, but with an even deeper stillness in his spirit, and an even sharper fire in his prayers. It was not miracles that proved his prophethood. It was his response. He became the voice of compassion in a world addicted to gain. He began speaking more clearly, more boldly, in gatherings of elders. Remember the covenant, he would say. Do not worship the works of your hands. Do not trample the poor beneath your wheels. The breath in your lungs was not earned, it was given. His words struck chords in the hearts of the faithful and discomfort in the hearts of the corrupt. Not all welcomed his new authority. He has grown proud, they whispered. He hides behind piety to increase his influence. But others could not deny the change. They heard him speak truth no man could have known. He recited the stories of Adam and Noah with unlearned accuracy. He spoke of the justice of God as though he had stood before the throne. He warned the people of days to come not as a merchant of fear, but as a messenger of mercy. Then came a moment that shook his village. A terrible fever swept through the outskirts. Dozens lay sick. Panic gripped the streets. Job, without hesitation, moved through the afflicted, touching foreheads, reciting quiet prayers, whispers of divine remembrance. And within hours, those he touched rose to their feet. Their fevers broke. Their strength returned. No man could deny the presence of God upon him. That night, the people gathered at his gate. Speak to us, they said. What shall we do to be righteous? And there, under the night sky, Job stood and delivered his first true message as prophet, not a decree of laws, not a proclamation of rituals, but a declaration of the heart. Gratitude, he said. Gratitude is worship. Every breath is a gift. Every morning, a summons to righteousness. Do not ask why you suffer. Ask whether you stand firm in it. Do not measure the love of God by the weight of your wealth. He is near to the broken. He hears the quiet sob. The gold of your hand will fade, but the gold of your soul is eternal. Return to the Most High not in fear of punishment, but in love of His mercy. This message struck deep. He did not call men to rituals alone. He called them to awaken their conscience, to wash their intentions, to remember the Creator not only in hardship but in ease. This was the core of his calling, to prepare hearts for a test. The world had forgotten that suffering is not a curse, but a furnace for faith. That hardship is not the absence of God, but often His most intimate nearness. Job's prophethood would not be one of outward revolutions. He would not raise armies. He would not part seas. He would not bring fire from the sky. But he would bring endurance from the soul. He would stand as a fortress in the storm. And in doing so, he would become one of the greatest signs ever given to mankind, a man whose very breath, even when labored by disease, whispered hope. A man whose silence spoke louder than sermons. A man whose tears became scripture. The Most High had chosen Job not to speak loudly, but to suffer deeply. And through that suffering, to remind the world of what faith truly is. Message and teaching. The message of Job was not carved into stone tablets nor shouted from mountain peaks. It did not come in grand declarations or divine thunder. It came in quiet endurance. In whispered prayers, in the trembling hands of a man who refused to let go of faith, even when the heavens fell silent. Job's teaching was not merely in what he said, it was in how he suffered. But still, his words carried power. And at the heart of his message was a truth lost to many in his generation: faith is not proven by prosperity. It is proven by perseverance. To those who sought wealth as a sign of God's favor, Job warned, blessings are a trust, not a guarantee. He taught that success should never breed pride, and that comfort must never cause forgetfulness. He reminded the people that ease is often the beginning of decline, not in body, but in soul. If you give thanks in ease, he said, you prepare your soul to stand in trial. Job's teachings revolved around gratitude, justice, and unseen endurance. He called upon the wealthy to share without counting. He urged the leaders to judge with clean hearts, to remember that the one above sees even the weights of dishonest scales. He did not merely teach justice in courts, but justice in the heart, to silence envy, to restrain pride, to mourn with the grieving and rejoice in another's blessings. But above all else, he taught the meaning of patience, not the kind that waits begrudgingly, but the kind that still praises while bleeding. He would say, the Lord is not far when we cry. He is closest when we are broken. If He tries the heart, it is because He wishes to polish it until it reflects only Him. He never promised His people that righteousness would protect them from hardship. On the contrary, He prepared them for it. He reminded them of Noah's loneliness, of Abraham's exile, of Isaac's surrender. His voice reminded them that those most beloved by the Creator were often the ones most deeply tested. Suffering, he said, is not a curse. It is a mirror. It shows us who we are, and it shows us who we trust. Job's message was quiet, but piercing. It did not entertain, it awakened. It challenged the soul not with ritual, but with introspection. And perhaps that is why, when his trial would descend, he would not need to preach any further. His life would become the sermon. His wounds would become the scroll. His silence would become a scripture of its own. For in every generation that followed, those who found themselves in pain would whisper his name. And without reading any of his words, they would remember what he taught, that even in the pit, even in the dark, even in the silence, God is still there. And the one who clings to him will rise again. Challenges and opposition. No prophet walks untouched by hardship. No bearer of divine truth escapes the fire. But the trials that descended upon Job, son of Esau, were not like the trials of other men. They came not as sudden disasters, but as a slow, deliberate unmaking of everything he had ever known. It began with whispers, doubts planted in the shadows. He is only faithful because he is wealthy, they said. Strip him of his gold, and he will curse the very name he now praises. These whispers did not rise from his enemies, but from beyond the veil, from the adversary, the accuser, the one who slithered through the unseen realm seeking to dismantle righteousness. And heaven allowed the test not out of cruelty, but as a witness. Job's first opposition came not from swords, but from fate itself. One morning, without warning, a servant came breathless to his door. The Sabaeans raided your oxen and donkeys. The herdsmen are slain. I alone escaped to tell you. Before the words had cooled, another ran in. Fire from the heavens fell. It consumed the sheep and the shepherds. Nothing remains. And then another. The Chaldeans attacked. They took the camels. They killed your men. And then came the final blow. Your sons and daughters were feasting, and the house collapsed. They are gone. All of them. His entire world, his wealth, his legacy, his children was stripped in moments. But Job did not curse. He tore his robe. He shaved his head. He fell to the ground. And he whispered, "The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." This broke the silence of heaven. But the test was not over. His body was next. His skin erupted with painful boils. His breath became foul. His strength vanished. He sat outside the city gates, covered in ash, scraping his sores with broken pottery. The same people who once praised his name now turned their faces in disgust. They said he was cursed. That secret sin had brought this upon him. That the wrath of heaven had finally found him. His wife, heartbroken and weary, pleaded with him, "Why hold on to this piety? Curse God and die." And still, Job remained silent in his pain and firm in his faith. Even his closest companions, men he had once helped, fed, and lifted, now turned into judges. 3 friends came, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. At first, they sat in silence. For 7 days and nights, they did not speak. But when they opened their mouths, their comfort turned into condemnation. "You must have sinned," they said. "No man suffers this much without guilt. Confess. Repent." Job, weak and trembling, did not deny his agony. He cried out to the heavens. He questioned the meaning of his suffering. He lamented the day of his birth. But not once did he turn against God. Even in his darkest hour, he clung to a truth deeper than understanding. "Though he slay me, yet will I trust him." That was the cry of his soul. His opposition was not only external. It was the gnawing voice of despair, the whisper that says God has forgotten, that the righteous suffer in vain. But Job wrestled with that darkness and never let go of the light. He stood alone. Afflicted. Rejected. Broken. But in that breaking, the heavens bore witness to a victory no sword could win, no empire could claim. Job's greatest battle was not with men but with the silence of God. And still, he remained faithful. Legacy and impact. The dust of his suffering may have long settled, but the echo of Job's endurance still shakes the souls of men. For centuries, kings and conquerors came and went, leaving monuments and memories that time eroded. But Job, a man stripped of everything, sitting in ashes with nothing but broken skin and trembling faith, left behind something no sword or crown could ever secure, an eternal testimony of faith that cannot be broken. Job did not command armies. He built no cities. He left behind no laws etched in stone. Yet his name became a pillar of resilience, a silent guardian to all who wander the valleys of pain. After his trials, the Almighty restored his health. His skin became like that of youth. His wealth was doubled. His children were returned to him, new sons, new daughters, with beauty unmatched in the land. But the power of Job's story did not lie in his restoration. It lay in the darkness he endured before the dawn. Generations whispered his story around fires and in temples, in synagogues and mosques, in churches and shrines. His name became the anthem of those who weep silently, who suffer without explanation, who kneel not for answers, but for strength. In the East, his patience became proverb. In the West, his name entered the common tongue, the patience of Job. But those who truly understood knew it was not patience rooted in passivity. It was patience born of war, a war within the soul to believe in goodness even when surrounded by ruin. Job's legacy was not confined to one people. He became a bridge between the sons of Abraham, revered in the Quran, honored in the Bible, and remembered in Jewish tradition. His life became the lens through which three great faiths understood divine testing, endurance, and trust. To the oppressed, he became a companion. To the sick, he became a prayer. To the doubting, he became a question with no simple answer but a presence that reminded them, even in the silence, God sees. The prophets that came after him looked back at his life not with pity, but with awe. Even centuries later, when disciples of Jesus wept in prison, when believers were exiled or enslaved, it was Job's name that rose from trembling lips. Be as Job was, they whispered. Do not break. And in every age since, whenever a soul cries out in anguish, feeling forgotten and alone, his story returns like a breath of light. A reminder that faith is not proven in blessing but in the barren silence, when everything is gone, and yet the heart still whispers, I trust you. His legacy was not gold. It was unshakable surrender. His reward was not restoration. It was divine intimacy in the fire. And his impact, it lives on in every soul that still stands scarred, bowed, trembling yet faithful. Job lives. Not in flesh, but in spirit. And his story will not end, until the last sufferer finds peace. Death and burial. After the winds of trial had stilled, and after the healing of his body and house had long settled into peace, Job lived on, not in fear of future storms, but in deep communion with the one who had carried him through the fire. He lived for many more years, 140 by some ancient reckonings, others say more. In those years, Job walked not as a man returned to his former life, but as one who had crossed the threshold of divine nearness. His voice, once strained by agony, now flowed like calm waters. His home, once shattered by sorrow, became a sanctuary for the poor and the broken. He was not just restored, he was transformed. Each morning, he rose before the sun and lifted his hands to the sky, not out of habit, but out of hunger for the presence of the one who had once tested him in silence and comforted him in the dust. And each evening, he gathered his family, sons and daughters, grandchildren, and strangers alike, and reminded them of the days when everything had been taken, and yet faith had remained. His house became a school of patience, his table a place of remembrance, and his land a resting place for orphans, widows, and the weary. But time, even for prophets, must come to its close. And as Job aged, his steps grew slower, his eyes dimmed, though his heart remained radiant. The people noticed it not decay, but a growing stillness, as if the earth no longer held him fully. It was said that even the animals would quiet when he walked by, sensing something eternal drawing near. In his final days, Job called his family together. His voice was soft, yet firm. He did not speak of fear, but of longing. I have seen pain, and I have seen healing. I have lost everything, and I have gained something greater. The world may see wealth as restoration, but I see the nearness of the Most High as the true reward. He blessed each of his children. He embraced his wife, whose loyalty had endured more than anyone could bear. And then, with nothing left to say, he withdrew to his place of prayer in Olive Grove beyond his home, where he had once wept under the stars. There, he laid upon the earth not in sorrow, but in surrender. And the soul of Job, prophet of the Most High, left this world not in struggle, but in peace. The heavens, it is said, rejoiced. For a soul refined by fire had returned to the one who had sent him. His body was buried with honor. Some traditions say he was laid to rest in Oran, in modern-day southern Syria. Others claim his grave lies in Jebel Kura, in Oman, or Urfa in Turkey. Though scholars debate the location, the earth remembers him still, for wherever the dust received his body, it received a man whose faith had been proven greater than gold. And to this day, his resting place wherever it lies remains not just a grave, but a monument to the endurance of the soul. He did not die defeated. He died as he had lived, steadfast, surrendered, shining in patience. Interfaith perspective. 1. In Islam, in the Islamic tradition, Ayoub, peace be upon him, is revered as one of the noble prophets, chosen and honored by Allah. His story is not told with elaborate speeches, but with a powerful simplicity that emphasizes the essence of divine submission. The Quran highlights his unwavering patience, and remember our servant Job, when he cried to his Lord, "Indeed, adversity has touched me, and you are the most merciful of the merciful." So we responded to him and removed what afflicted him of adversity. And we gave him back his family and the like thereof with them as mercy from us and a reminder for the worshippers. Surah Sad 38:41, 43. The Quranic focus is not on the reasons for his suffering, but on his response. His dua prayer during pain is a model of humility. The miraculous spring that God made to heal him, strike the ground with your foot, this is a cool and cleansing spring. Surah Sad 38:42 became symbolic of healing through divine mercy. Islamic teachings place immense value on his patience, so much so that the name Ayyub has become a title of endurance in Muslim cultures. He is often invoked in moments of hardship, and his legacy is taught to emphasize the sacredness of perseverance, even when trials seem endless. 2. In Christianity. In the Christian Bible, Job's story is one of the longest and most profound meditations on suffering, justice, and divine mystery. The Book of Job, found in the Old Testament, is composed of 42 chapters that explore the tension between human suffering and the sovereignty of God. Job is introduced as blameless and upright. He feared God and shunned evil. Job 1:1. His trials unfold after a conversation between God and Satan the adversary, in which Satan argues that Job's faith is tied to his prosperity. With divine permission, Job's wealth, children, and health are stripped away. Yet Job's faith remains, and in his cries and laments, Christians see a man who seeks both justice and intimacy with God. His famous words, "Though he slay me, yet will I trust in him. Job 13:15 have echoed through centuries of Christian suffering and martyrdom. In Christian theology, Job's story is often seen as a foreshadowing of Christ's suffering, in that both suffer innocently and serve as a witness to faith under trial. The book of Job is frequently cited in pastoral care, Christian counseling, and theological discussions on divine sovereignty, pain, and endurance. 3. In Judaism. In the Jewish tradition, Job Ayoub is both a historical figure and a symbolic narrative. The Tanakh preserves his story in poetic form, and rabbinic literature expands on his character in various interpretations. The rabbis of the Talmud debated Job's origins and time. Some believed he lived during the time of Abraham, others placed him among the counselors of Pharaoh during Moses' era. Yet regardless of timing, the core of the Jewish view of Job is his honest struggle with divine justice. Unlike in other traditions, Jewish readings often highlight Job's dialogue with God, his right to question, to grieve, and even to argue. His interaction with Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar becomes a discourse on theological assumptions and human limitations. In the end, God speaks out of the whirlwind, not to answer Job's questions, but to remind him of the vastness of divine wisdom. To Jewish scholars, this does not diminish Job, but elevates him. He is not condemned for questioning, he is affirmed for enduring. Job's story has become a cornerstone in Jewish discussions of theodicy, the justice of God in the face of human suffering. His name is revered in synagogues, studied in yeshivot, and remembered in times of tragedy. A shared legacy. Across Islam, Christianity, and Judaism, Job stands as a timeless witness that suffering need not destroy faith, that silence does not mean abandonment, and that the soul refined by pain may shine brighter than gold. Though each tradition sees him through a different lens, all agree on this: Job was tested. Job endured. And Job triumphed not by force, but by faith.